Thank you for your subscription. Thank you for your support. Thank you to everyone who stayed, even when this channel felt uncomfortable, even when it felt dangerous to keep listening. This is Unauthorized Knowledge. We don't promise comfort here. We promise research. We promise questions. And the work is still ongoing. Jesus did not die for your sins. He was executed. Jesus never meant to die. He was murdered. What you are about to hear is not meant to settle your faith. It is meant to unsettle the story you were handed. This is not a lesson. This is a transmission. History did not disappear by accident. It was managed. After Jesus was executed, there was no religion carrying his name, no Christianity, no organized church, just scattered people repeating words Rome found dangerous, words about authority, words about power, words about God not belonging to institutions. That is not religion. That is rebellion. Rome understood that immediately. They did not see Jesus as divine. They saw him as disruptive, a man separating God from empire, a man telling people that obedience to God did not mean obedience to power. That is why he was watched. That is why he was hunted. That is why he was executed. If this was a holy sacrifice, then explain the resistance. In the garden, Jesus says, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me."
Father, if this cup could pass me by, let it be so. But not my will, but your will be done.
This is recorded in Mark 14:36. That is not preparation. That is resistance. On the cross, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing."
Oh God, my Father, please forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing.
Recorded in Luke 23:34. You do not forgive people for fulfilling destiny. You forgive people for committing violence. Then comes the most dangerous sentence ever recorded. My God, why have you forsaken me?
My God, why art thou forsaken me?
Recorded in Mark 15:34 and Matthew 27:46. That is not the voice of a willing sacrifice. That is the voice of someone realizing he has been abandoned by systems, by followers, by power itself. This is not theology. This is trauma. Jesus did not want to die. He was killed. And if Rome regretted killing him, the violence would have stopped.
Bring forth Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, and Bartholomew. Execute them by my command.
It didn't. James was killed by the sword, as recorded in Acts 12:2. Peter was executed. Many were imprisoned repeatedly and later killed. Others vanished into prisons, crucifixions, and silence. This was not remorse. This was cleanup.
Kill anyone who witnessed the killing of Yeshua HaMashiach.
Empires do not apologize to threats. They erase them. Only after the witnesses were gone did the story change. They said it was written. They said he had to die. They said this was always the plan. Poetry was turned into policy. Prophecy was turned into permission. And Roman records confirm this moment. Tacitus, writing around 116 AD, does not describe salvation. He describes executions. He calls the movement dangerous. Pliny the Younger, writing to Emperor Trajan in 112 AD, asks how to interrogate and punish people called Christians, not how to worship with them, how to kill them legally. Josephus mentions Jesus briefly, but even his text shows signs of later editing, hands moving across parchment after the danger had passed. This matters, because Christianity as an institution does not appear until later, long after the blood dried, long after the threat was neutralized. Now look at the pattern. When an activist is killed, the story always changes. The victim becomes a symbol. The system becomes innocent. The danger is neutralized. Martin Luther King Jr. was surveilled while alive, labeled dangerous, and tracked by state institutions.
I have a dream that one day we will all be free.
After he was killed, the system cleaned the story. They turned him into a harmless dreamer and removed his challenges to power, economics, and war. They did not regret silencing him. They managed the narrative after. That is how systems work. They do not admit execution. They invent sacrifice. That is not redemption. That is damage control. Now return to Jesus. If his blood saved the world, then what about the blood of the disciples? They died the same way, hunted, executed, erased. Did their blood also save humanity? Or were they simply witnesses who knew too much? You already know the answer. The doctrine was not written to reveal truth. It was written to prevent investigation. Because if people realized Jesus was killed for what he said, they would start listening to what he said. And that was unacceptable. That is not faith. That is containment. That is not worship. That is obedience training. That is not religion. That is rebellion, captured, reframed, and sold back as obedience. And here is the part that should disturb you most. If Jesus appeared today, teaching the same message, challenging the same systems, separating God from institutions, he would be silenced again, because his words are still dangerous. That is not belief. That is exposure. That is not salvation. That is defiance. This channel exists because some truths were never meant to survive, and yet they did. Research is ongoing, records are still being examined, fragments are still aligning. And if this transmission unsettles you, if it makes you uncomfortable, then you are exactly where you are supposed to be.